This is the surge the other way, the hemorrhaging of a dying nation. A humanitarian disaster unfolding, the UN says. Nearly 4 million Iraqis displaced now by sectarian cleansing, kidnap and carnage. 2 million have fled altogether, half of them here in Syria. Busload after busload arriving in Damascus, 100,000 more every month. Sunni, Shia, Christian, Chaldean and Turkmen all tell stories of chaos, destruction and death. The land they all love, no longer fit to be lived in. This woman's son has been kidnapped twice.
My tragedy as an Iraqi is that I've had to flee my country, abandon my home and turn my children into refugees. We were threatened again and again. They shut down my husband's shop, drove us out of our home.
Omar considers herself a refugee, but she's not considered a refugee by the Syrian government. 5,000 a day queuing to register, but Syria hasn't signed the UN Convention on Refugees. Desperate Iraqis hoping for long-term refuge, but classified as visitors and given temporary visas. And with new, tighter restrictions already in force, there's a pervasive fear of mass deportation back to Baghdad. In neighbouring Jordan, 1 million Iraqis in a country of 5 million people. The population of Amman has doubled in less than 3 years. The issue, political dynamite here. Half the population is already made up of Palestinian refugees. They don't want any more. Iraqis here have already been forced to live under the radar. Men skulking in back alleys. Only women venturing out onto the streets, some as prostitutes, others, like Qasem, we found selling cigarettes by the roadside. She insisted we follow her to see how she lived, with her son and daughter-in-law and 4 grandchildren. I warn you, she told me, it's not fit for animals. She was right. This, the hole, where the old lady sleeps.
The rain came pouring in here last night from up there. We're still alive, but only just.
Up the dark, narrow corridor, the room where the rest of them live and sleep, and eat when they can afford to. Hussein is too scared to step outside. Even for a haircut, he told me. He said they'd fled to Jordan to get medical treatment for Haider, his son.
A mortar landed right outside our house in Sadr City. Haider was playing outside the door. I miss Iraq a lot. There is no country in all the world like my country. The land of Iraq is worth more than all the Arab countries put together. I want to kiss the soil of Iraq. It's the richest country in the world. May Allah help us.
Qasem, the family breadwinner, went back to her cigarettes. On a good day, she makes just £2. No wonder Haider, the child with the burns, still hadn't had any treatment. Elsewhere in this warren of houses, there's maybe 1 million stateless people. They've escaped from hell in Iraq, but now they're stuck here in limbo. Many are destitute, most are illegal. They can't get healthcare, there's no schooling and no jobs. And there's always that looming threat of summary deportation. Like Syria, Jordan doesn't recognize Iraqis as refugees either. But the UN Refugee Agency here has been mobbed by them anyway. Jordanian intelligence agencies so sensitive about what's happening here, we'd been expressly warned not to film these queues. We did so discreetly.
There's a lot of security there.
The UN has advised Jordan to grant these people refugee status. Jordan continues to refuse to do so.
We have a different position as far as the fact that we view the Iraqis from central and southern Iraq as refugees. We feel that the great majority of them have fled for reasons of the general insecurity and violence that has taken place in Iraq. Jordan views it within an Arab neighborly context where they consider them visitors temporarily residing in Jordan without looking into their particular humanitarian context, but judging it within a political situation.
Jordan's clamping down now, barring the entry of young Iraqi men, turning back plane loads of Shia Muslims. Overland transport between Iraq and Jordan has ground to a standstill. The bus station, once teeming, now empty. Big four-wheel drive taxis now rarely running the gauntlet to Baghdad. Among Jordanians, Syrians and Iraqis, a growing sense of outrage that the rest of the world has washed its hands of this problem, that Britain and America in particular have turned a blind eye to the fallout of their endeavour in Iraq.
It's really the height of hypocrisy. Countries that were instrumental in fighting this war, that initiated this war, that fought this war, and that have, through their botchops, have created this chaos in Iraq today. These countries are refusing to receive refugees coming from Iraq. They prefer them to be bottled up in Jordan. They're talking about providing aid to these people so that they can be taken care of and do not feel any great pressure to leave Jordan. But of course it's not a Jordanian interest that they stay here either. And so there's a contradiction in the policy between the European countries and Jordan over the fate of these refugees.
Jordan, loath to solicit international assistance for fear of turning the kingdom into even more of a refugee mecca. Iraqis were initially welcome here. Early arrivals, Baathists and businessmen were loaded. But when house prices tripled, Iraqis took the rap. It wasn't entirely their fault, but false impressions have festered and resentment runs high. The middle class exodus followed. The doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, none of them made to feel particularly welcome. And then came the hairdressers. 3 barbers from Baghdad escaped and set up shop in Amman last year. Life had become unlivable. One had been kidnapped, their shop car-bombed twice. Religious zealots had also been killing off Baghdad's beard trimmers. We filmed with these men openly, but have chosen to conceal their identities after witnessing a lightning police roundup of Iraqi illegals. Reports of forced deportations ever more frequent now. The barbers' temporary residence permits long expired.
It is difficult. Working here is hard. Iraqis aren't allowed work permits. We don't have residency either. It's scary. Our lives are totally unstable. All our passports have been cancelled. If you do leave, you can't get back in. Britain and America should open their doors to Iraqis. Jordan isn't letting them in anymore.
The Brits and Americans brought this disaster on us. They're the occupiers. The solution is also in their hands. They brought their armies across the continent, so surely they can solve this. Let them get us out of this mess. Why don't they let us in? Why is Sweden the only country accepting Iraqis?
Unable to go home, stranded Iraqis dream of sanctuary in Sweden, but it's a dream that costs. Munir, one of the 3 barbers of Baghdad, has just shelled out $20,000 to people smugglers and 6 weeks ago successfully escaped to Europe's snowy north.
Of course I miss him. He's a friend of mine. We spent a lot of time with him. And it's our dream, me and Hassan, to follow Munir to Sweden.
Their dream likely to remain a dream, though. But we were able to follow Munir to Sweden. Sweden has a relatively generous asylum policy. More than 80,000 Iraqis have already settled here. Now words got out among the new wave of exiles, Sweden's been deluged. Last year it accepted half of all the Iraqis smuggled into the European Union. To find Munir, we headed to a coastal village several hours' drive south of Stockholm. He'd arrived in Sweden with his wife, Shaima, and baby Sarah in mid-January. Munir was kidnapped in Baghdad last year. A big ransom and a broken leg later, he fled. The relief of arriving here they described as like throwing iced water on hot coals.
It had become a living hell in Baghdad, and it was getting worse. When you'd leave your house in the morning, you'd never know if you'd come back dead or alive. You put a piece of paper in your pocket with your phone number and address on it. So if you died on the road, you'd be returned to your home. That's how bad things had got. From Amman, we started by going to Syria. All the procedures took place there. There are specialist people smugglers from whom you buy foreign passports. It's a complete package. They change the photos, all that sort of thing. We flew from Syria to another country, waited in the airport for a couple of hours, then caught another flight. When we landed, our smuggler told us, "This is Stockholm. My work is over." He took our passports and said, "Now you're on your own. Find a police officer and turn yourself in."
Stockholm's northern suburb of Rinkeby is as close as Sweden comes to a ghetto. Name your world hotspot, they're here. Iraqis, though, now a human tide, 500 every week. The backlog of case files building up. Sweden bracing for a threefold increase this year, forcing the issue onto the EU agenda. Last year, 2006, was the deadliest year in Iraq since the invasion, and that is what triggered the surge. Of the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who fled, 8,951 arrived here in Sweden, and about 80% of those will be allowed to stay. In contrast, the number of Iraqis allowed to stay in the United States, 202, and in Britain, 205. There's a new centre-right government in Sweden and a quiet indignation building in Stockholm's corridors of power that Sweden has been cast as Europe's soft touch.
Well, the problem is, who are you to direct that anger towards? I mean, after all, we do need to be generous. We do need to show solidarity to the people who are experiencing the trials and the terrors right now of Iraq. And I personally, as Minister for Migration, feel that it is my responsibility to try and act on that feeling, that people really need to be given shelter if they are persecuted or pursued by people.
Munir and Shaima sat with me and watched our pictures of their old friends Ali and Hassan still stuck in Amman. I just hope they get out of that mess, Munir told me, and that they can get here and rest. Shaima's just learned that she's pregnant again, but their happiness is overshadowed by the torment of conflicting emotions.
It's difficult to describe. Yes, we're happy we escaped, but all my thoughts are with my family. I miss them a lot. I wish they were here. Every moment of the day I think about them. I wish I could turn back time, to have just a moment back to hug my mum again. I wish I could see my mum and hug her. I really miss my mum. I don't know how to describe it in words.
It will be many months before Munir and Shaima hear if they've been granted asylum, but someday one of the three barbers of Baghdad may open a new salon in Sweden. Although thousands of Iraqis continue to pour into this country, they're a drop in an ocean of outcasts. Millions uprooted and now disavowed. The suspicion mounting that for Britain and the United States to admit more Iraqis would also be to admit that they failed those they'd once sought to liberate.